Good morning, Ray. Thank
Hi,
you for
Jennifer.
joining me for this episode of Leading with Body Intelligence. I'm a student of yours through the Embody Lab, and I am looking forward to this one-on-one time with you to talk about closure. When I heard this on one of the classes I was in, I immediately thought of people that are going through work transitions and how applicable knowing, having information about closure could be for them. Before we dive into that conversation, would you tell folks just a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, my day job is I'm a professor in a somatic psychology PhD program at the California Institute for Integral Studies. I've been working as a scholar, as an academic, as an educator in graduate education for the past 20 years or so. Before that, I was a social worker and a somatic psychotherapist and somatic movement educator. So most of my life, my professional life, has been focused on um, incorporating body awareness, somatic intelligence into a process of personal learning and growth. But my research area for the last, again, maybe about 20 years has been the intersection of embodiment and social justice. So in a way, I'm a little different than many of my somatic colleagues, my somatic psychotherapy colleagues in particular, in that I'm not focused so much on the personal um, as I am on the social and the political and the
Mhm.
cultural elements of how we live in our bodies.
Okay. And how did all of that bring you to the 7 steps of closure?
I learned the 7 steps of closure in a psychodramatic bodywork training that I was taking many years ago. I trained with a wonderful teacher named Susan Aaron, who's still teaching psychodramatic bodywork. She's in Toronto, but she travels around and trains people in this particular modality. And I'm not entirely sure where she got it from. I suspect she may have got it from psychodrama. So if I'm going to sort of credit the lineage of this information, for sure, at least in terms of where I learned it, it's through Susan Aaron, but I think maybe it's got psychodramatic roots, which is,
And can you define that for us?
yeah, psychodrama is um, a psychotherapeutic modality that explores personal and interpersonal issues in dramatic through dramatic means. So, for example, if you were doing a psychodrama to explore one of your own issues, you would work with a group of people and you would identify the people in the struggle or the challenge or the difficulty that you're having. And you would choose people in your group to stand in for members of, for example, your family or your boss, and you would act out, you would dramatize the struggle that you're having or the challenge you're facing. And through that dramatic enactment of the situation you wanted some help with, you would have an opportunity, for example, to say things that you never said in real life or needed to practice saying so that you could say them in real life. It would give you an opportunity to illuminate the situation that you're in, not just by thinking it through yourself or talking it over with one other person, but by actually engaging a group to help you live or relive the situation. And as you
Okay.
might imagine, psychodrama is it's very vivid and visceral because you're right back in the situation that you've been having trouble with, or you're really shifting the situation that you're wanting to deal with because you have the opportunity to actually practice in your body and with the bodies of others
Hmm.
behavior or the new dynamics or the new ways of interacting. So it's a
That sounds
remarkable, yeah.
it sounds very validating and very regulating. A place, a safe space for people to process their emotions.
Yeah, um, it is, I think when it's done well, a remarkably safe space. And it's also an incredibly enlivening space. So it doesn't
Mhm.
always, in fact, every time I've done a psychodrama, every time I've directed a psychodrama or been a participant in one, everyone's heart rate is up. It's like it's very enlivening. It's not like, oh, this is safe and cozy. It's like, oh my goodness, here I am in this situation
Mhm.
been giving me so much trouble or really challenging me in my life or that I've been carrying around with me for years. Because the lovely thing about psychodrama is that you can re-enliven situations that happened to you 20, 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And 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 make them as if they are happening again right now in a way that allows you to transform them.
Okay. So I can see the value in that, like you said, 20, 30 years ago, or even, present day, like
Mm-hmm.
for professionals that might be facing the idea of change within their workplace. That they may
Mm-hmm.
not even know clearly what that's going to look like. They're going to need some closure in the future. They're going to need some closure now. How would that play out in a scenario like that?
Well, rather than have it play out in a scenario, I think it might be more helpful for listeners just to hear the 7 steps of closure,
Yeah,
and
let's do that.
that'll give them some context. And I'd also like to explain a little bit what closure means. It's
Mhm.
actually a term that's used fairly frequently in counseling or psychotherapy circles, but it's not necessarily something that everyone understands or is familiar with. So really what we're talking about when we use the term closure is we're referring to a sense of meaningful completion.
Mm.
So it's not just that something is over, but it's over and we feel like, oh, I got some meaning from it, or I have a sense of resolution around it. And closure is not always easy to achieve. It's not just, the fact of something being finished. It's also, have I processed that experience, particularly when it's a significant life experience that has a lot of meaning or emotion attached to it. So closure is a process that we go through to help us digest and integrate and settle and make meaning so that really what we've learned, what we're taking from that experience is something that we can then take with us so that we just haven't left it in the past. We've taken the meaning from that experience and are then able to carry it forward with us in a way that feels useful to us, that allows us, for example, to have learned something from
Mhm.
that experience. And closure can occur, and the need for closure can happen in all kinds of different situations. So, everyday occurrences. For example, if something upsetting or challenging or confusing or disorienting happens to you, while you're in the grocery store, and you carry it with you all the rest of the day, and you get to dinner time and you're still gnawing on it, it's still kind of bothering you.
Mhm.
That's a good sign that maybe you need some closure around it, that you need to find meaning from it.
Mhm.
You need to extract that meaning, and then you need to come to a place of, so how am I with this? What does this mean to me? And what do I want to do about it? So that's closure.
Okay. It sounds empowering.
It is empowering because it allows us to take action around events that have happened to us in our lives and make meaning and extract learning from them. It really, rather than having our life events feel like something that has happened to us,
Mhm.
Closure allows us to reposition ourselves to feel like, this is something that I'm taking from this experience, rather than just, I guess I just have to live with the impact.
Yeah.
Closure
Yeah.
actually suggests that our lives are not what happens to us, but our lives are really about the meaning that we make of things that happen,
Mm,
and that's what shapes who we are. It gives us a
okay.
much more active role to play with
Mhm.
respect to experiences than just having them, remembering them, and letting those experiences really basically have their way with us.
Yeah. Nurturing our self-efficacy, would that be another way of looking at it?
Absolutely. It gives us an opportunity to take action after the fact in
Mhm.
a way that allows us to transform how that experience sits with us and lives within us.
The 7 questions
Mhm.
are it should one do them in order, starting with 1, moving through 7, or can they ask them in reflect on them in any order? Do you have a recommendation for someone that's new to this? Of the 7, what would they start with?
Sure. Um, it doesn't particularly matter, but let me start by sharing the 7 questions.
Yeah.
6 of them I took from Susan Aaron, who I mentioned before, and 1 I added on my own. So here are the 7 questions that when an experience or an event is sitting with you and it feels unresolved, or you're still like wrestling with it a little bit, here are 7 questions that you can ask yourself that might help bring that experience to a deeper sense of resolution and closure. First question is, what did I get from this experience? What did I gain? What did I learn? The second question is, what didn't I get? So what did I get? What did I not get? What did I get that I would have liked to, or that I was hoping, or that I was expecting to get? Because often when things are still rattling around unsettled, it's because we had an expectation that wasn't met. Right? Third question is, what did I bring to the experience? And this really asks us to be self-reflective and to realize that in many life experiences, we're bringing something to that. It's not just stuff happens to us and people do things at us. It's, oh no, we actually are a contributor to how those events unfolded. And it can be incredibly helpful in terms of that sense of empowerment and self-efficacy. Like, oh yeah, I actually brought something, and I brought something good, or oh my God, I brought something that was not helpful and really did shape how that turned out. How good that I now know this. I've had the opportunity to reflect and to realize, I was bringing something too. I was bringing a charge, or I was bringing an attitude, or I was bringing unreasonable expectations, for example. Knowing that allows us to shift so that the next time that something happens that's similar, we can ask ourselves, what would I like to bring this time?
Mm.
So the fourth question has to do with what's unfinished or what's still in progress. Sometimes we're involved in a meaningful experience and we're not quite done with it. We didn't get all the things that we wanted or we thought we were going to get, or all the things didn't happen yet. We're not quite finished, but somehow the experience itself is now declared over and we're left with this sense of unfinished. Something's not quite done. And it's incredibly helpful to identify that and to name it. And naming something that's not quite done yet, still feels like it's unfinished or still in progress. For example, a conversation that I still need to have, or something that I still need to do in order to feel like, now this experience feels more complete for me. So number 4, what's unfinished or what's still in progress, is an incredibly helpful question to have answers to, because then it leads us to the 5th question, and that's, What's next? Now what? Now that I understand, I've made some meaning of what's happened to me, what I got, what I didn't get, what I brought, all of that. Now what? What am I going to do with this? And again, that's where that sense of agency and self-efficacy comes in, because asking the question, what's next, allows us to appreciate that even when something has happened to us, we have some choices about where we go from here.
Mm-hmm.
So now what? And that's question number 5. And those first 5 questions are really the ones that, when you do them, allows you to extract meaning from that experience and begin to transform it and begin to integrate it into your life, in a different way. So those first 5 questions, I think, in many ways, are the most important. The last 2 questions are more about, how am I bringing some things to this experience, and to this experience particularly of closure, that might be affecting it. So the 6th question is, how is my own history and how are my own preferences affecting this present day situation? And by that, I mean, we all have our own styles of saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
My partner and I often joke about this because we come from very different cultures. And she says, you will leave without saying goodbye. And I say, yep. And you'll say goodbye and never leave. She's always in the process of saying goodbye and drawing it out. Whereas I'm the opposite. It's like, I'm done now, off I go. I mean, when I was younger, I've learned because I've realized that this does not work for everybody. But when I was younger, I would just leave parties and never say goodbye to anyone. I was finished. I would just walk out the door thinking, okay, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Not realizing that other people had a need for closure that I didn't have. So understanding our own styles and preferences. And then if you're interested in it and it feels useful to you, looking at, how did I come up with these preferences? And this I often refer to as the ghosts of closure's past.
Mm-hmm.
Is the way closure happened or endings happened for us earlier in our life affecting how we're handling goodbyes now?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if something really important happened and you lost a friend and they moved away and you never had a chance to say goodbye, and that really affected you, or you didn't get to go to your grandmother's funeral, or I mean, there are all kinds of things that people say when I ask them this question, and they think, what has shaped how I say goodbye and how I handle endings? And there are often a number of very significant events that they can remember that has shaped how they do this. And it's not all, I mean, it really varies according to the person. One person might say, oh yeah, I never really had a chance to say goodbye in many important ways in my life and when I was a kid. And so now I over say goodbye. I spend, I'm compensating for it, and I'm really holding on and drawing out the ending process as much as I can. But a different person will say, yes, I also didn't get to say goodbye very much when I was a kid, for example. And so now I don't do it myself. So it really, there's no formula for this. There's no way to predict how your own history is going to shape your own preferences around saying goodbye. And there's no one right way to do it. The purpose of this question, which is, how is my own closure history affecting how I say goodbye now, is to understand more deeply where you're coming from and why you're reacting the way that you are. It just helps you shed some light onto why, for example, this particular experience of ending is so difficult or so challenging, because it might remind you of something else. And so this question is an opportunity to pause and to look at your own history with the understanding that there's no right or wrong. There's just, oh, does this help me understand what's happening for me right now a little better? The seventh question, the seventh step of closure, is really looking at ritual and activities that help us feel more finished. So we have graduation ceremonies. They look the same. They, year after year, and across the country, and even in different countries, and there are classic gestures that allow people to participate in closures where they go, yes, after this happens, then we're over, we're done. So it might be a ritual or a celebration or some kind of other activity. In the United States, there's this classic ritual of when you're graduating from university, you've got a particular kind of cap on that's got a tassel on it, and as soon as the officiant of the graduation says it's okay, everyone switches their tassel from one side of the hat to the other side of the hat. That's an example of a closure activity or ritual that's meaningful because it's collective, because it's understood. You go into that graduation ceremony knowing that that's what's going to happen, that as soon as you switch that tassel over to the other side, you're graduated, you're done. And then everyone throws their hats in the air, and that's another, collective sort of cultural ritual that, is associated with finishing being at university. And you can walk away going, I'm done now, because there was a collective communal ritual with shared meaning that allowed you to participate in it, and it gives you a greater sense of closure. That's why people go, even though they'll still get their diploma, and they're still, the degree will still be granted, even if they don't go to graduation. People go to graduation because it's a closure ritual.
Closure ritual.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's helpful to ask, because sometimes we don't have closure rituals, and in many ways, people have argued that in more modern society, we have less and less ritual, shared communal ritual on life transitions.
Mm-hmm.
But
What would you say? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rae.
asking that question, is there a ritual? Is there a meaningful action? It doesn't have to be community. You can do it yourself. Is there a meaningful actual or ritual that I might take that would help me feel more settled? So that's the purpose of that last question, because sometimes that's what we need. We need to say, yes, I did this. And once I did this, then I was done.
Yeah. What would you say to someone who, I mean, there's professional transitions, various different kinds, but kind of, I think maybe possibly, worst case scenario is when it's not your choice and you're transitioning out of a position that maybe you've had for some length. Your identity is attached to it. What would you say to someone going through that? Because I have seen people that are, they continue to struggle with that for, years on end. And it affects as they go into their next professional role, because they're taking those things with them. What would you say for folks like that, or to folks like that?
What I'd say is do the 7 steps of closure. That's exactly what this is designed for. It works in any situation, but it works particularly well when the ending wasn't our choice.
Yeah.
And when the experience that's over was a meaningful one, we will have lots that we will need to extract from it. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you get fired from a job, and all of a sudden your professional identity feels like it's up in the air because you don't know who you are now because so much of your personal identity was tied up in your work. But you also have lost a sense of community. You maybe, if you were fired, didn't have the opportunity to say goodbye to your colleagues. You were just told on a Friday afternoon, and by 5 o'clock that day you were out, and you had your belongings in a box, and you never saw these people again, right? So there's all kinds of things that are unfinished and unresolved that need attention. And asking yourself these questions will help with that. That's why closure theory exists. That it's useful to give yourself an opportunity, and it doesn't need to happen right away. You can give yourself all the time that you need. But after that experience, at some point, you're going to go, why does this still feel unfinished? Why am I still chewing on this? Why am I still obsessing over what happened? For me, the answer to that question often is, because you haven't done closure with it. You haven't walked yourself through the elements that will actually allow you to put that experience to rest. It's not always a one and done. The bigger the life experience and the more jarring or upsetting or difficult it is, the longer closure can take. But it's a process that you can work. And these 7 elements can help you with it. That asking yourself, what did I get from this job? Rather than playing the scenario of, the moment that you got fired and you heard those words and you realized what was happening. Rather than focusing on that, ask yourself, what did I get from this job? What was helpful? All of it. Maybe you got community. Maybe it's like, I got this and this and this. Oh, that's why I'm grieving. That's why I'm so upset. And naming it and acknowledging it validates how you're feeling. And then that gives you the opportunity to look at, now that I've really worked through all of the things that this meant to me, now I can start to look at what's next.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you can come to your next job with a cleaner slate, with a sense of, yes, I worked here. I don't anymore. I got a lot from that experience. Or there's things that I didn't get that I wish I had. Or I contributed a lot. I need to acknowledge that. So the example that you have of, someone, for example, losing their job or having to transition in their professional careers is perfect. Closure works really well for those kinds of situations where we're not in control of the ending.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of those situations. Now, what about in a scenario where perhaps the environment is so toxic and people reach a point where they for their own mental health and well-being, they choose to leave? Is it any different in that scenario when they're making the choice to part ways?
No different at all.
Okay.
So, for example, perhaps you leave a marriage or a long-term relationship. The same questions are still useful. You may not be ready to contemplate all of them right off the bat. You might need some time, but at some point, it will be useful to ask yourself, even if you were in a relationship that felt to you like it was so toxic and so challenging and so difficult and so painful that you know that leaving was the right choice, you might still have some unresolved feelings about it. And that's normal. And those unresolved feelings can be helped to settle by reflecting on. So even though this was a really toxic relationship and I need to, be really sure that I don't do something like this again, what did I get from it? Because we always do. We always get something or thought we were going to get something. And so there's the first 2 questions right off the bat. What did I bring? What did I bring to this relationship? What's unfinished about it? Is there anything else, like anything still in process or unresolved? When it's a marriage, sometimes the the span of time between leaving someone and actually being legally divorced. Years. Maybe there's children involved. So that's still in process. Just being able to name, it's like, oh, right, that's why I don't feel done. It's because there are all these tendrils and threads that are still in process, that are still unfinished. Oh, okay. And even just naming it and acknowledging helps us feel more settled.
And when you say settled, are you talking about the nervous system, settling the nervous system, or otherwise?
I'm just talking about a general overall feeling. Some people might say, yeah,
Mhm.
that's my nervous system. Some people might just say, I feel more settled.
Settled.
I feel more relaxed. I feel more at ease about this. I feel more comfortable. It's not,
Just feel
I,
better.
I just feel better. I don't feel as agitated. I'm not obsessing about it anymore. Things just feel like, when people describe everything's up in the air,
Yes.
closure is things aren't up in the air anymore.
Right.
That's what I
Right.
mean.
That's a great visual. Rae, may I share the 7 steps of closure with when I post our interview, as long
Absolutely.
as I've got
Absolutely.
your copyright on
Yep.
it? Okay.
Yeah, it's not something that I've copyrighted. It's something that I encourage people to share with attribution. So yeah, but if you've got that handout, feel welcome to post it. The more people know about this, the better.
The better, yes, for
Yeah,
all of us. All
yeah.
right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rae.
You're very welcome.